Hello guys, welcome back to our YouTube channel. We'll continue with wills and codicils. We stopped in our last discussion discussing the types of gifts. We talked about the general legacy. We talked about specific legacy. Now we're going to talk about demonstrative legacy. Now let's just give some few examples of specific legacies. Like we said, let's say someone says, or the testator says, I give my laptop to my gate man. That is specific. So the gift is identifiable, not just my laptop, my HP laptop with description and everything. So it is not open um for for deliberations. Like, okay, what does it actually mean when he talked about laptop? So the description of the gift is specific. So that's why it's called specific legacy. And what are the advantages of specific legacies under a will? It is not liable to abate where there is insufficient funds or the estate is not enough to satisfy all legacies, debts, obligations, and other expenses. It can't even abate, because it is identified, it is already there. So it can't abate. What are the disadvantages? Where the specific gifts no longer exist or cannot be found at the time of the testator's death, the beneficiary gets nothing. So say for example, the testator says, I give my Toyota Camry 2018 model to my gate man, and he made that will at the time of his death, and when the will is being read out, the Toyota Camry no longer exists. Let's say for example, it's been burnt by fire and it's nowhere to be found. So the beneficiary, the gate man, will get nothing because it was a specific legacy, and the executors cannot take money from the estate of the deceased to buy that Toyota Camry, right? So that is that. We also have demonstrative legacies, right? This is also a type of gift. This is a gift directed to be satisfied from a specified source or pool of property, usually but not restricted to money payable from a particular bank account, right? So it combines in some way the nature of a general and a specific legacy. So I will give you an example. For example, when I say I give 200 units of shares from my shares in UBA to my steward Emeka Usman, or when I say I give 1 million naira payable from my current account with Sky Bank PLC, Wuse 2 Abuja to Samuel Adebayo. So that is what a demonstrative legacy is. So the testator is giving 1 million naira from his account. That is not to say that 1 million naira is all that is in his account. He's just giving from a pool. He's giving 200 units of shares from his shares at UBA. That is not to say 200 units is all the shares he has at UBA, right? Now, it is there with the next type of gift is pecuniary legacy. It is basically a monetary gift. It's called an annuity, where it is expressed to be paid at intervals. It may be general, demonstrative, or specific. So pecuniary legacies are usually monetary gifts. So for example, where the testator in the will says, I give to my cook Mary Eka 100,000 naira, that is a pecuniary gift, a pecuniary legacy. Okay, now there's also what we call the residuary legacy, and you see that under section 25 of the Wills Act of 1837. This refers to the undistributed residue, as the name implies, residuary legacy. It refers to the undistributed residue of the testator's estate after satisfying all bequests and devices contained in the will, right? And also paying all obligations, debts, expenses, taxes, and liabilities relating to the estate. Don't forget, if a testator dies, the estate or the executors are expected to pay off his debts from the estate. So if after paying off the debts and giving out whatever is in the will and nothing remains, residual legacies, those who are entitled to residual legacy, they won't even get anything. So residual legacies comprises of the following: properties acquired by the testator after making the will and the codicil. Right? So if someone makes a will, the person may not die immediately, most likely not die immediately. Somebody can make a will and not even edit or review it 10 years after he has made the will, and of course nobody knows when they will die. So he may not really be updating the will every time he buys a property. So those properties made after the will has been executed or made, those properties and those assets forms what we call the residuary legacy. Properties acquired by the testator after death, is as possible. Gifts that lapsed for lack of substitution clause, and gifts that failed for diverse reasons. All of these forms residuary legacy, right? So it's basically, one of the effects is that it basically leads to partial intestacy. So those gifts gotten after the death or after the will has been made, it is to some extent, to that extent, if you really look at it, it is intestate. The disease died intestate with respect to those properties, because there was no will made to cover those properties, right? So it leads to partial intestacy. Look at section 53 of the Administration of Estate Law of Lagos State. So an example of a residuary legacy, because you may see that in your exams for those taking the bar finals. A will may be given to you in context, and you'll be asked to identify the type of legacy or the type of gift that each of the clauses in the will is. So one of the examples I can give you now for residuary legacies, residuary gifts, is this: I hereby give all other properties not specifically disposed by this will, or any codicil, including any property over which I may have power or of disposition by will, to my children in equal shares. Right? So that's a typical residuary legacy clause in a will. Then there's a doctrine of lapse and failed gifts. In the course of this teaching, I've been making references to failed gifts, lapse, and all of that. So perhaps you've been wondering, what does that really mean? Now, by the doctrine of lapse, a gift fails if the beneficiary predeceases the testator. So what does that mean? Somebody makes a will and says, I give my property to this and this, or let's say, for example, the testator makes a will and gives his property to his gate man, part of his property, and the gate man dies before the testator. So in that instance, you say the doctrine of lapse has taken place. So the doctrine, the gift has failed because it has lapsed. That's because the beneficiary died before the testator. The beneficiary predeceases the testator. Now there are exceptions, statutory provisions. Look at section 22 of the Wills Act, section 24 of the Wills Law of Lagos State, right? And all of that. You also have gifts made in discharge of a moral obligation. So in that instance, for example, a debt, it cannot lapse because the beneficiary has died before the testator. If in the will, the beneficiary is supposed to get 2 million for the debts owed to him by the testator, and the beneficiary dies before the testator dies, it does not take away the obligation of the testator to still pay that 2 million naira to the beneficiary. So the beneficiary's estate can take advantage of that. Now, what are the instances where a gift may fail? One, the beneficiary disclaims. So it's possible, strange but possible, that the beneficiary can say, you know what, I don't want this gift. He gave me something. So for example, a typical example is a child who hates the father, and the father provides for the child in the will, and because the hatred is still there, the child says, I don't want anything relating to my father, I don't want any gifts from him, so he disclaims the will. So in that instance, the gift will be said to have failed. Another instance where a gift may fail is the beneficiary or his spouse witnesses the will, section 15 of the Wills Act. Then by operation of the doctrine of ademption, that's specific gifts, then the beneficiary predeceases the testator, that's lapse. Then gift to testator's spouse due to divorce or annulment of marriage, that's section 18A of the Wills Act. Then another instance where a gift may fail, public policy or where it promotes illegal purpose, right? Gifts. So, for example, somebody provides in his will that he gives his 9-year-old daughter to somebody to marry immediately. That's not possible. It's against public policy, right? Then gifts contrary to the principle of inalienability, abatement or insolvency, uncertainty, a gift contingent on a condition which is not satisfied, then a gift obtained by fraud. All of these are instances where a gift may fail, right? So all of these are instances where a gift may fail. Then the next point I'll talk about is the revocation of a will. The revocation of a will. The ambulatory nature of a will renders it revocable by the testator at any time during the lifetime of the testator and before his death. So when a person makes a will and executes it, the person can, during his lifetime, revoke that will. Revocation may either be voluntary, that is by the act of the testator, by a subsequent will, or codicil, right? So a testator can revoke a will either by a subsequent will or a codicil. A testator can also revoke a will by a written declaration of intention to revoke the will. He can also revoke the will by burning, tearing, or otherwise destroying the will with the intention to revoke or involuntarily, that is, by operation of law, by a subsequent statutory marriage. Now, we're going to talk about voluntary revocation here, right? And one of the points under that is the subsequent will or codicil. When a person has a will, he can decide to jettison the first one and write another will. So that's having a subsequent will, or amend the existing will by what can be referred to as an appendage, right? So that's a codicil. A later will may by implication revoke an earlier will if it covers practically the same grounds as the earlier one. So, for example, the usual clause of revocation of earlier will, if it is missing in the new will by implication replace or revoke the earlier will if it provides for what the earlier will provides for. In the earlier will, for example, it says I give my pen to my gate man. In the new will, it also says I give that same pen to my gate man. So automatically the new will in that instance shadows the earlier will. An example of a revocation clause when you're having a new will is I revoke all former testamentary dispositions made by me. When you're drafting, don't forget this. That is a revocation clause, and it's usually in all wills. I mean, the ones I have drafted in practice, I have seen it there, and in most other instances, most cases of wills I've seen and read out, it's always there. So you do that to revoke previously existing wills. So the clause reads, I revoke all former testamentary dispositions made by me. You can look at the case of Henfrey and Henfrey, 13 ER 211, right? So that is revoking a will by subsequent will or a codicil. Like I said, another instance of revoking the will is by a written declaration or intention to revoke the will, right? Then another instance is by tearing. I think I should just quickly mention under the point of a written declaration of intention to revoke the will, it should be noted that whatsoever form it takes, the written instrument or declaration must be executed like a will. So the test for attestation and all of those things and execution must be satisfied. That is the requirement of Section 9 of the Wills Act of 1837 must be fulfilled, right? That is very, very important. And look at Section 4 of the Wills Law of Lagos State. Talks about the requirements for a valid will. Another way to voluntarily revoke a will is by burning, tearing, or otherwise destroying the will with the intention to revoke. That intention is very important. So when a will is torn and there's no intention to revoke that will, pieces can be brought together, and it can be proven that that will is still valid. Look at the case of Cheese against Lovejoy, 1858, 2 PD 251. Then intention to destroy. The act of revocation must have been carried out with the intention to revoke. Otherwise, the revocation would be invalid. Okay, mutilation, burning, tearing beyond recognition, cutting or scratching out the signature of the testator or wills or witness are sufficient acts of destruction and would revoke a will. That is very important. The revocation of a will by destruction can be done personally by the testator or by any other person, but the act must be done in the presence of the testator and at his request and direction. Otherwise, it would not be valid. It would not be a valid revocation. So we'll stop here on the part 3 of wills and codicils, and we'll continue in our next discussion. Please like this video, drop your comments in the comment section. If there are topics you want us to talk about after this, let us know. We'll talk about it. Don't forget to subscribe. Click on the subscribe buttons with all your YouTube accounts if you have not yet subscribed, and you can share the video for others to learn. We'll continue from here next time. Thank you.